What if society's definition of success, marriage, kids, shared plans is nothing more than a script designed to keep you predictable, even if it slowly erases who you really are? We glorify relationships, but what if staying single is the only way to truly meet yourself and everything else is just distraction dressed as love? They call independence lonely, selfish, or incomplete. But what if those labels are just fear talking? Fear of seeing someone live free without needing approval? Welcome to StoicCraft, the channel where ancient Stoic wisdom meets the raw challenges of modern life. Here we break down the illusions society sells us and rebuild from the only foundation that lasts: inner strength, freedom, and clarity. Have you ever truly paused and asked yourself, what if everything society labels as love is nothing more than fear of being alone? What if the constant urge to have someone beside you isn't about deep desire, but about escaping the emptiness you feel when the room grows silent? What if what you proudly call a relationship is often just another strategy to run away from yourself? Nothing cuts closer to the truth than the discomfort we feel when we are left with solitude. That restless unease is not because solitude is unnatural, but because we are terrified of the mirror it holds up. The Stoics often urged us to reflect on deathbeds, to imagine the room quiet, the air heavy, and the weight of an entire life pressing down. In that final moment, they asked us to confront one piercing question: did you truly live your own life, or did you merely exist in the shadow of someone else's? Their wisdom was clear: surrendering your inner freedom, no matter how beautiful the disguise, is the heaviest chain of all. Yet we dress those chains carefully. We call them romance. We wrap them in companionship. We celebrate them in the illusion of completion. But somewhere deep inside, something burns. A whisper, a tear in the facade day, reminding you that you were meant for more. If you've ever heard that whisper, if you've ever felt that subtle truth pulsing beneath the surface of your relationships, you already know this message is for you. And if you are brave enough to face yourself without the masks, if you long to build a life rooted in your own strength and sovereignty, then stay here. Consider this not just a video, but an invitation to meet the version of yourself who refuses to abandon their soul for the comfort of being chosen. Most people don't fall in love because they've arrived at a place of wholeness. They fall because they're terrified of the silence waiting when the noise fades. The kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts, to confront the questions you've been avoiding for years. They fill that silence with another person, not always because they deeply want that person, but because it feels safer than being left with their own reflection. We rarely admit this, but much of what we call love is nothing more than avoidance dressed in poetry. It's easier to get lost in someone else's stories, emotions, and chaos than to sit alone with your own. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And for so many, a relationship isn't a bridge to real connection. It's a shield against loneliness, a stage to pretend they are understood, even when they've never truly understood themselves. But here lies the problem. When love is rooted in fear, it becomes fragile. Every disagreement feels like a threat. Every moment of distance looks like a crack in the glass. The relationship becomes an impossible container tasked not only with holding two people's lives, but also their unresolved wounds. And when those cracks appear, panic sets in. People cling tighter, silencing their needs, bending their values, reshaping themselves into versions that no longer feel true, all in the desperate hope of keeping the other person from walking away. That isn't love. That's survival, a desperate tactic to avoid being left alone with the silence. They've been running from Dot, and here's the irony. In chasing love out of fear, the very opposite happens. Instead of growth, there is shrinkage. Instead of freedom, there is quiet. Suffocation. Instead of standing firm in truth, people bargain away their authenticity in exchange for temporary reassurance. This is why so many slowly lose themselves in relationships without even noticing it. At first, it looks harmless. You compromise on where to eat, what to watch, how to spend a weekend, but then it deepens. You begin holding back your passions because you know they won't understand. You stop pursuing certain dreams because they spark tension. You adjust your personality not because you want to grow, but because you're afraid your full self might cost you the relationship. And over time, the person staring back in the mirror feels unfamiliar, even to you. Marcus Aurelius warned us, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." And isn't that the quiet tragedy of so many lives? They stop truly living, not because they died, but because they were too afraid of losing someone. When the foundation of love is fear, it steals from you the very thing love is meant to give, freedom. True love should allow you to stand taller, not force you to shrink smaller. It should amplify your individuality, not erase it. Yet when fear runs the show, love becomes a contract of unspoken rules. Don't be too much. Don't change too fast. Don't disturb the fragile balance, even if that balance is quietly suffocating you. And here is the cost. People pay for this illusion with their authenticity, their creativity, their future growth, all of it surrendered for the fragile comfort of never facing themselves. But the irony is striking. The silence they're running from was never their enemy. It was always their teacher. In solitude, the noise clears, and for the first time, your true voice can be heard. At first, it's uncomfortable. You hear doubts, regrets, and fears. But if you stay with it long enough, you also hear your values, your calling, your truth. Carl Jung put it beautifully. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you cannot become that person if you're constantly drowning in someone else's presence. If every thought you have is shaped to keep the peace rather than to find your own center, what happens to the real you? The fear behind love is rarely about losing another person. More often, it is about losing the distraction they provide. Because when that distraction is gone, you are left alone with yourself. And for many people, that is the most frightening encounter of all, not the loss of another, but the confrontation with their own soul. Yet that confrontation, as terrifying as it may feel, is the encounter that changes everything. Once you learn to sit with your own silence without desperately reaching for escape, you begin to discover a hidden strength. You stop depending on others to make you feel whole. You stop negotiating away your identity just to feel that you belong. You start loving from a place of choice, not desperation. And that is the kind of love no absence or distance can shatter. because it isn't built on fear, it is built on freedom. Choosing to face the silence is never easy. It takes courage to stop grasping for another person just to avoid yourself. But that courage is the seed of a new kind of life. A life where love is no longer a crutch you lean on to keep from falling, but a gift you freely give. Where being with someone is a deliberate act, not an unconscious escape. Where you can walk away from what diminishes you, not out of indifference, but out of a deeper care for yourself. The fear behind love will always keep you running in circles. But facing that fear will finally set you free. And freedom, as the Stoics taught, is the only possession no one can ever strip from you. From the moment we are old enough to understand stories, this conditioning begins. It seeps into bedtime, tailies, into movies, into the way adults casually speak about life. You grow up, you meet someone, you fall in love, you settle down. This path is painted as the ultimate destination, the final chapter where all loose ends are tied neatly and the credits roll over a perfect, happy ending. But almost no one asks, what happens after the scene fades to black? And even fewer stop to question whether this script serves everyone or whether it quietly robs us of the chance to meet the most important person we will ever know ourselves. This conditioning doesn't shout like an order, it whispers. It hides in the polite questions of relatives. When will you meet someone? As if your life were nothing more than a waiting room for love. It sneaks into compliments that tie your worth to your relationship status. By the time we become adults, the story is no longer questioned. It is absorbed into us as unquestioned truth, like gravity. And the effect of this quiet programming is profound. Without even realizing it, many grow into adults who believe life without a partner is incomplete by definition. They may travel, learn, build careers, create beautiful lives, but somewhere deep in the background, there's always an unspoken reminder. All of it is just filler until you find someone. So they enter relationships not from readiness, not from genuine self-knowledge, but from a sense of duty to the story they were handed. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For many, a relationship becomes a clever way to avoid that terrifying work. If someone else validates us, we don't need to fully validate ourselves. If someone else mirrors our worth back to us, we don't have to sit in the silence that demands. We define it for ourselves. This invisible conditioning doesn't just influence who we choose. It shapes how we behave once we've chosen. If you've been taught that your worth is tied to being partnered, you will endure situations that wound you just to avoid returning to the dreaded state of single. You will ignore red flags, tolerate disrespect, and contort yourself into someone else's version of enough, all to avoid the shame of being alone. Marcus Aurelius observed, "It is not the things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." And here the judgment is subtle but crushing. Alone equals failure. Together equals success. This false equation keeps countless people trapped in lives that bear little resemblance to who they truly are. It's worth pausing to notice. This script doesn't account for individuality. It's one size fits all, yet sold as a universal truth. Some flourish in deep, committed partnerships. Others need long seasons of solitude to grow into themselves. But the conditioning rarely leaves room for that second option. Solitude is framed as loneliness, and loneliness is portrayed as a sickness that must be cured as quickly as possible. And the pressure doesn't just come from others. Over time, it begins to live inside you. Even when no one is watching, you feel restless in your own company, as if being alone means you're falling behind in life's race. That restlessness becomes the background music of your days. You learn to measure progress not by how deeply you've come to know yourself, but by how close you are to fulfilling a cultural blueprint you never chose. The danger of living by this blueprint is that it discourages self-exploration. If the destination is already decided, why bother wandering off the path? Why bother asking whether that destination even fits the person you've become? This quiet conditioning tells you that discovering yourself is optional, secondary, less important than finding someone else. And in doing so, it quietly invites you to abandon any parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into the relationship narrative. You suppress ambitions, silence interests, hide unconventional ideas, all because they might make you harder to match with the script. This way, the story doesn't just shape your relationships. It reshapes your identity. Jung often spoke of individuation, the lifelong task of becoming your truest self. That journey demands space, time, and the courage to stand apart from the crowd. But the invisible conditioning whispers the opposite, that you must merge, pair off, and bind your life to another's as soon as possible. And here lies the deepest tension. Individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, calls you inward. It asks you to listen to your own voice, to walk your own path. Yet the cultural script you were handed pulls you outward, insisting that fulfillment must come through another person, through merging into a role designed for you long before you were ready to choose. And without realizing it, many people spend decades living in this tension, one force urging them to step into authenticity, the other tugging them toward conformity. It's not that love or companionship is wrong. Far from it. The issue is when it becomes compulsory, when partnership is sought automatically, not because you're ready, not because you've discovered who you are, but because you've absorbed the belief that this is simply what you're supposed to do. When relationships are entered under the heavy weight of conditioning, they often reflect that conditioning back at you. They feel safe, familiar, even comforting, but they rarely challenge you to discover your full depth. You may find stability, but you won't necessarily find the truth of yourself. The tragedy is that by the time you notice, years may have slipped away. The person you could have been, the writer, the artist, the explorer, the self-assured version of you, feels distant, almost unreachable. The very first step in loosening the grip of this invisible conditioning is awareness. To see the story for what it is, a story, not a law of nature, changes everything. Once you realize you are free to write your own script, the urgency to find someone loses its power. The space of being single no longer looks like an empty room. It becomes an open field, a place where you can plant new ideas, pursue long-buried dreams, and cultivate parts of yourself that could never survive in the cramped soil of living solely for someone else's approval. The Stoics called this living in accordance with nature, aligning your life with your own true essence, not with artificial narratives handed down by society, Breaking free from conditioning doesn't mean rejecting love forever. It means refusing to let the fear of being alone dictate your choices. It means choosing to know yourself deeply before choosing to share yourself. Because when you finally meet someone from a place of wholeness, you won't be seeking them to plug a void. You'll be inviting them to walk beside you on a path you've already made your own. That kind of connection cannot be manufactured by conditioning, because it isn't born from fear. It is born from freedom. But here's the reality: transformation doesn't happen in a single lightning bolt moment. It's rarely a dramatic awakening where one morning you simply know. More often it unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly. So slowly that you can convince yourself nothing is changing. It begins with a small compromise. You skip something you wanted to do because it doesn't fit the plan. You soften your opinion in a conversation to avoid a spark of friction. You tell yourself this is maturity, that love means meeting in the middle. And at first it feels harmless, even noble. But over time, these concessions pile up. The person you once were begins to fade, not because anyone demanded it outright, but because you offered pieces of yourself away bit by bit, never calculating the cost. The shift is so subtle that it doesn't feel like a threat. You adapt to keep things smooth, to avoid conflict, to protect the bond you think you cannot live without. And while compromise is natural in any meaningful connection, there is a dangerous difference between adapting and erasing. When you start filtering your thoughts before you even speak them, when you swallow desires before they see daylight, you are no longer building a bridge of love. You are trading authenticity for security. The Stoics warned against this quiet bargain. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." True freedom means being able to exist fully, without rehearsing every line before it leaves your lips. Yet when love becomes a stage, when you are always auditioning for acceptance, freedom slips quietly out the back door. What makes this disappearance so insidious is that it often disguises itself as growth. You reassure yourself, I'm becoming more understanding. I'm being less selfish. I'm learning flexibility. And sometimes that's true. But there is a fine line between growing and shrinking. And when that line blurs, you may not realize which side you're on until it's long behind you. You begin to notice little signs. You laugh less freely than before. You pursue fewer of the passions that once set your soul on fire. You hesitate before speaking what's really on your mind. In isolation, none of these changes feel alarming, but together they form a quiet erosion of self. Slowly you sand down the unique edges that once made you unmistakably you, all so you can fit more neatly into someone else's comfort. What makes this erosion dangerous is that it is rarely imposed directly. Very few people explicitly ask you to disappear. Instead, you do it to yourself, piece by piece, in the belief that it is the cost of connection. The unspoken mantra becomes, love survives when I am easier to live with, when I am agreeable, when I edit myself into a softer version. And over months or years, the person staring back from the mirror feels familiar, but strangely distant. The outline remains, but the fire, that specific combination of thoughts, desires, and expressions that made you you, has dimmed. This slow disappearance is not limited to romantic love. It can happen in friendships, families, even workplaces. Unaware the pressure to belong outweighs the courage to stand as yourself, the erosion begins. And because the change is gradual, it feels natural. You convince yourself, everyone compromises. This must be the cost of connection. But deep inside, a restlessness stirs, a whisper that you have given away too much, that the story you're living is no longer your own. There's a part of you that never forgets, a memory of when you felt fully alive in your own skin, unapologetic, unedited, whole. That part aches when you realize how much of yourself you've gradually tucked away just to be accepted. And here's the painful truth. Disappearing in this way doesn't make a relationship stronger. It quietly erodes it. Bonds built on half-truths and filtered selves may look stable from the outside, but underneath they grow fragile, riddled with resentment. What once looked like genuine closeness slowly becomes nothing more than the performance of harmony. Marcus Aurelius warned us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are constantly shaped to avoid conflict, your soul inevitably fades into muted tones of avoidance. You lose the vibrant colors that once made you unique. Reclaiming yourself from this slow disappearance doesn't mean swinging to the opposite extreme, refusing all compromise, or insisting on rigid independence. It means remembering a deeper truth, love in its purest form. Whether it's love for a partner, for a friend, or even for yourself, thrives when both people stand whole. It means realizing you can be kind without dissolving your boundaries, that you can be loving without silencing your truth. The courage to live fully as yourself will sometimes create friction, but friction is not the enemy. As the Stoics reminded us, life's tests are the training ground for strength. A relationship that collapses under the weight of your authenticity was never strong enough to hold you in the first place. The seduction of disappearing lies in its safety. On the surface, things look smoother, but safety is an illusion if it comes at the expense of your own life force. You were not meant to be a softened, palatable version of yourself just to preserve the idea of love. Love that requires your absence is not love at all. It is a slow contract of self-abandonment. The moment you finally recognize this, everything shifts. You begin to see that the greatest gift you can give any relationship is the fullness of yourself, unfiltered, unedited, uncut by fear. And when you stopped disappearing, you stopped trading your life for someone else's comfort. You began living it as it was always meant to be lived, whole, present, and unmistakably yours. Belonging is one of the deepest human desires. We are wired to seek it, to feel anchored in a place, a group, or a person. There's immense comfort in knowing you have somewhere to return to, someone to call you theirs, a life that feels shared instead of solitary. But what we rarely acknowledge is the quiet toll this belonging can take when it's not grounded in true freedom. The cost is rarely demanded outright. It shows up as a quiet, nearly invisible negotiation of your thoughts, your desires, your very essence. You begin to sense which parts of yourself are welcome and which need to be tucked away. And with every small trade, you feel safer in belonging, even as something essential in you begins to fade. This safety often comes wrapped in rules. Some are spoken, most are not. You learn which opinions are better left unsaid because they disrupt the peace, which ambitions should be toned down because they upset the balance. even emotions, raw, unfiltered, deeply human, are measured carefully so they won't make others uncomfortable. And slowly you begin living in a strange middle ground. Never too much, never too little, always adjusted to fit the room, the group, the partner. Epictetus once warned, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Yet belonging often makes us unwilling to be misunderstood. We choose smoothness over honesty, acceptance over self-expression. And with every repeated choice, the shape of who we are begins to shift. The subtle danger is that this cost often feels like love. You tell yourself you're compromising because you care, because you want to be a good partner, friend, or family member. And sometimes that's true. But the line between healthy compromise and slow self-erasure is perilously thin. Belonging has a way of nudging you across that line without you ever noticing. One day, you wake up and realize you only speak when it feels safe. You've shelved dreams that once set you ablaze because they no longer align with the shared plan. You've become cautious, measured, less spontaneous, not because you've grown, but because spontaneity risks disapproval. The cost of belonging isn't usually paid in dramatic betrayals. It is paid in countless small, almost invisible installments. The joke you didn't make because you weren't sure how it would land. The truth you swallowed because it might spark conflict. The risk you avoided because you didn't want to. Explain yourself to someone who wouldn't understand. Individually, each decision seems harmless, but together they form a pattern, a slow bleeding away of authenticity. Over time, you find yourself living not for your own clarity or growth, but for the stability of the group, the relationship, the approval of others. You start to believe that the more you give away, the more you'll belong. But here is the truth. If your thoughts are constantly adjusted to match the expectations of others, your soul will eventually lose its distinct color. Staying single, or even just embracing solitude when it calls, is how you keep ownership of your inner landscape. It is how you protect your thoughts, desires, and essence from the constant background negotiation of belonging. Solitude is not isolation. It is sovereignty. It is the reminder that you are enough without needing to erase yourself for acceptance. To live from your own center means every decision flows from your truth, not from endless calculations about how others might react. This doesn't mean connection is dangerous or that love should be avoided. On the contrary, love, friendship, and community can be some of life's most powerful sources of growth and joy, but they only serve you if they allow your full presence. If belonging demands constant self-editing, then it isn't connection. It's a subtle form of control, and control, no matter how gently disguised, is still limitation. It clips your wings and slowly erodes your ability to live as yourself. Jung reminded us that individuation, the path of becoming whole, cannot happen when your identity rests on the shifting sands of others' approval. You cannot integrate the parts of you you've hidden away to keep belonging. To choose yourself over the comfort of the crowd is never easy. It means you may have to stand apart, break unspoken rules, or release relationships that cannot hold. The weight of your truth. At times, this choice feels sharp, like loneliness pressed against the ribs. Yet it also carries a different kind of relief. The relief of no longer needing to constantly adjust, the relief of keeping your own voice intact. And within that freedom, something remarkable stirs. You begin to belong to yourself in a way that cannot be taken from you. Yes, the cost of belonging is real, but so is the reward of keeping your own life in your own hands. Staying single, or simply choosing solitude when needed, doesn't mean rejecting love. It means refusing to trade your essence for it. It means that when you do step into love or community, it will be on your terms, as your whole self, without shrinking to fit. Belonging tastes sweetest when it doesn't require you to abandon who you are. And here is the paradox. The moment you claim your freedom, every other connection grows richer, deeper, and more genuine. Once the constant hum of other people's voices fades, something unexpected rises in its place. At first, it feels unsettling, almost too loud. Thoughts you had buried under conversations, obligations, and the gravity of someone else's presence began to surface with startling clarity. Alone, there's no one to drown them out. They come like dust shaken loose in a long sealed room. Overwhelming at first, but necessary. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Solitude forces this awakening. It asks you to turn inward, to stare directly at the truth you've long avoided. The discomfort is real, but buried in that discomfort is a rare gift. Clarity. As days and weeks pass, clarity deepens. Without the need to constantly adjust your thoughts to someone else's rhythm, your mind stretches wider, braver. You begin exploring paths you once dismissed because they didn't align with a shared plan. The inner world expands, revealing connections and insights you never noticed while you were busy adapting. This is the part people rarely mention when they talk about being alone. The sharpening of the mind, the deepening of thought, the way creativity blossoms when it's no longer diluted. At first, solitude feels like loss. No partner to share the mundane details of your day, no one to consult before decisions, no echo of your words returning immediately. But slowly you realize what you thought was absence is actually space. Pure, unclaimed space. And space has always been where truth hides. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. In solitude, that truth becomes undeniable. You stop outsourcing validation, direction, and worth. They start coming from within. That shift is almost impossible to explain until you experience it, but once you do, it changes everything. At first, you try to fill the silence with noise, music, screens, endless chatter. But gradually, you allow the silence to stand. You realize not every thought needs to be drowned out. The discomfort you feel in stillness is often the process of meeting yourself again, and in that stillness, desires sharpen. You learn which dreams are truly yours and which were merely borrowed from the expectations of others. Forgotten passions stir again. This is when solitude shifts from unbearable to quietly addictive. Not because you wish to avoid people, but because you've tasted what life feels like when it is yours alone. There is a unique energy that flows from being alone on your own terms. It's not the loneliness of rejection. It's the sovereignty of choice. The Stoics would call this alignment with nature, living according to your own compass rather than bending to another's. You begin to notice just how much of your old life was built on reaction, to moods, to your needs, to the invisible tug of someone else's plans. Now, your energy is freed for creation. You're not managing someone else's emotions before tending to your own. You're not holding back excitement or ideas for fear of being misunderstood. Time itself feels different in solitude. It stretches, it opens. You can pursue an idea until it's fully formed, unhurried. You can follow inspiration at midnight or pause in the middle of a project simply because your spirit shifts. You don't need to explain yourself, and in these moments, you realize how much energy you use to spend simply maintaining balance in a shared life. That energy is now yours, ready to be invested in what matters most. Of course, solitude isn't always golden. There are days when silence feels heavy, when you long for the ease of another's presence. But even in those moments, you start to understand the weight is shaping you. It's building your capacity to stand firmly on your own, to sit with your own mind without fear, to grow unshakable in the quiet. Eventually, the space solitude creates no longer feels like a hollow void. It begins to feel like home, a grounding, presence rather than an absence. You realize that the most meaningful connections you'll ever experience, whether with others, with the world, or with your own work, are deeper and richer when they grow from this foundation of self-belonging. You stop fearing the state of being alone, because you've seen firsthand what can be built there. And once you've tasted the sharpness of thought, the clarity of vision, and the raw pull of your own unfiltered desires, you begin to protect that space fiercely, not as a wall that shuts others out, but as the firm ground you stand upon, steady, rooted, unshakable. Because when you belong fully to yourself, no connection can strip that away, and no absence can diminish it. From the earliest stories we're told, however, there runs a persistent thread, the promise that somewhere out there exists another person who will complete us. It's in fairy tales whispered to children, in songs sung on the radio, in movies that end with two lovers finding each other, as if that is life's grand finale. The message is clear. You are not whole until you find your other half. At first, this idea feels romantic, even comforting. It suggests that life's deepest fulfillment isn't something you need to cultivate within, but something you will receive by merging with another. Yet hidden beneath that comforting narrative is a dangerous belief that on your own you are incomplete. Once you accept this belief, it quietly seeps into every corner of your life. You start living as though your worth and stability depend on someone else's presence. Decisions are weighed not by their alignment with your truth, but by their potential to attract or maintain a relationship. Your life begins to orbit around the hope of being chosen, of being enough in the eyes of another, and slowly, almost invisibly, you begin to edit yourself. You might mute your ambitions so they don't unsettle a partner. You might downplay aspects of your personality that don't fit the polished image of the ideal companion. Over time, your identity becomes less about what feels true to you and more about what will secure connection. This is not love. It is dependence masquerading as devotion. And dependence, no matter how beautifully packaged, always erodes individuality. Dependence seduces because it offers a counterfeit sense of safety. It whispers, as long as the relationship stands, you are secure, but that safety carries a heavy cost. You start measuring your value not by your own standards, but by how seamlessly you fit into someone else's life. You ignore the quiet stirrings within, the dissatisfaction, the dormant curiosities, the unspoken dreams, because pursuing them might disrupt the delicate balance of belonging. Epictetus once wrote, "If you want to be free, then wish for nothing that depends on others." Freedom does not grow in the soil of dependence. It shrinks there, withers there, until one day you wake up and realize you've built your life on ground that can be swept away at any moment. When you buy into the myth of incompleteness, relationships stop being conscious choices and start being lifelines. That's why the thought of losing a partner feels so terrifying to many people. It isn't just the sting of heartbreak. It feels like losing a part of themselves, like being severed from the very thing that made them whole. This is why people stay in relationships that no longer nourish them, silencing instincts, ignoring needs, tolerating disrespect, because leaving would feel like collapsing into half a life. But here's the truth: you were never half of a whole. You were never incomplete. You have always been a full, complex human being, capable of love, creation, and purpose without needing to fuse yourself to another. The wholeness you crave cannot be borrowed. It can only be built from within. So where did this myth originate? Much of it is cultural. Societies have long idealized the couple, the family unit, as the pinnacle of achievement. Singlehood, by contrast, is often framed as a temporary purgatory, a waiting room you're expected to escape as quickly as possible. Even language betrays this bias. Terms like settling down imply that only in partnership does life take its final, valid form. But this narrative ignores reality. Partnership is not a guarantee of fulfillment, and singleness is not a sentence of lack. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." The myth of incompleteness hides this truth, keeping people searching outward when the real work has always been inward. Breaking free of this myth doesn't mean rejecting love or connection. It means approaching them from self-sufficiency instead of need. When you no longer see yourself as a fragment waiting to be completed, love becomes a conscious choice rather than a dependency. You can give without fear of losing yourself. You can receive without making it the foundation of your identity. This kind of love is richer, deeper, because it's born between two whole people who could stand alone if they had to. Jung understood this well. He believed that true connection is only possible when both individuals have faced their own inner worlds instead of using each other as an escape. And yes, choosing wholeness can feel lonely at first. Without the quick validation of a relationship, you must face yourself in full, your flaws, your strengths, your untapped potential. That is the work most people run from, which is why dependence feels easier. But once you begin building a life that feels complete on your own terms, something shifts. The fear of being alone fades. Your self-worth stops swinging on the pendulum of others' moods or opinions, and the relationships you do form are not built to fill a void. They are built to share abundance. The myth of incompleteness is powerful because repetition has made it feel like truth. But the real truth is far more liberating. You are not half of anything. You are a whole, capable being. The more you live from that place, the less tolerance you'll have for connections that demand you to shrink. You'll stop treating love as a cure for your existence and start seeing it as a complement to it. And in that shift, dependence loses its grip. Individuality returns. Your life stops being a frantic search for a missing piece and becomes at last the conscious creation of something whole, built entirely on your own terms. Buying a house, getting married, having children, these are presented to us as milestones of success, proof that we're on the right path. Society celebrates them because they make you predictable. Predictability comforts the collective. When you're part of a couple or a family, people think they know what comes next. Your life has a familiar rhythm, one that's easy to understand, categorize, and quietly manage. But step outside of that rhythm. Live unapologetically single. Chart a life that doesn't follow the template. And suddenly, you become harder to define. Your next move isn't obvious. You don't fit neatly into the expected script. And that unpredictability makes others uneasy because it signals something they can't control. Freedom. The herd thrives on stability. It wants to know what to expect from you, and in exchange it offers you the safety of acceptance. But there's an unspoken condition attached. Don't stray too far from the path. When you're coupled, the path is almost pre-written, shared. Goals, mutual compromises, predictable milestones. There's nothing inherently wrong with that rhythm unless it drowns out the beat of your own drum. A thriving single person doesn't just hear their own rhythm, they live by it. They make choices without waiting for consensus. They move in ways that can't be forecasted. And in a world built on conformity, that kind of autonomy is both magnetic and threatening. The power of unpredictability lies in agency. If no one can predict your next step, it means no one else is writing your script. You are to the herd that freedom looks like instability, but to the outlier, it feels like oxygen. Without the constant need to negotiate or justify every decision, you can pivot when inspiration strikes. You can take risks that make sense only to you. You can chase opportunities others might dismiss. The ability to act without delay, without compromise, is a rare currency in today's world. Of course, the herd doesn't just ignore the outlier. It tries to pull them back in. The questions come disguised as concern. Don't you want someone to share your life with? Aren't you afraid of being alone? Beneath these questions is an assumption that a life outside the couple framework is less valuable, less complete. But that's only the perspective of people measuring life by how closely it mirrors the majority. Outlier knows solitude, when chosen, is not lack, it's luxury. It's a wide open space where self-determination flourishes without interruption, and that knowledge becomes a shield against the pressure to conform. What unsettles others most about the thriving single person isn't their solitude, it's their contentment within it. If you're single and miserable, the herd feels validated. It reassures them their path is better. But if you're single and thriving, you disrupt the narrative. You prove happiness isn't reserved for couples, and that forces people to question the compromises they've made. Carl Jung understood this discomfort. He wrote that the deepest conflicts, when overcome, leave behind a calm that cannot be easily disturbed. The thriving single person has faced society's conflict head-on and emerged with a calm the herd cannot replicate. Unpredictability breeds resilience too. When you don't depend on another person to define you, you're less shaken by change. The herd fears disruption because it destabilizes their carefully constructed lives, but the outlier flows with change, accustomed to navigating without a pre-drawn map. They know life can shift in an instant, and they've trained themselves to adapt. In the end, the difference between herd and outlier isn't about whether you're in a relationship. It's about agency. The herd follows patterns, written by others, finding comfort in numbers. The outlier accepts the risk of stepping off the path, knowing it may be uncertain, but also knowing it's theirs. The thriving single person understands that unpredictability isn't chaos, it's potential. It's openness to shape your life, by choice, not by default. They're not rejecting love or connection. They're rejecting the false idea that connection must erase individuality. In a culture obsessed with predictability, the refusal to be easily defined is both rebellion and declaration. I belong to myself first, and that kind of belonging cannot be given, and it certainly cannot be taken. It's built, earned, protected. Once you have it, you realize it is the rarest power of all. Great ideas rarely appear in noisy rooms. They don't grow in constant chatter, endless obligations, or the weight of others' expectations. They emerge in still hours when the world falls away and no one is tugging at your attention. There's an electricity in those moments, the long nights when you're lost in thought, the early mornings when you wake without obligation. In solitude, your mind roams freely. It stumbles into uncharted territory, makes connections it could never make under the gaze of an audience. Jung once said, "Solitude is for me a fountain of healing which makes my life worth living." He understood that creation isn't just about inspiration. It's about space. Without space, ideas can't take form. Alone, you can chase an idea to its depths without having to defend why it matters. You can follow a thought into obsession without explaining it away. You can let it consume you for hours, days, even weeks, with no one there to ask you to slow down or change course. And in that freedom, your mind becomes what it was always meant to be, a forge, a place where raw sparks turn into fire. That freedom, the freedom to sink fully into your own process, is a rare and precious gift in a world obsessed with constant connection. It is in that spaciousness that the creative edge sharpens. Without compromise, without the subtle weight of adjusting your pace to another person's rhythm, your mind stretches into places that cannot be reached in the noise of the crowded. Spaces, whether physical or emotional, always pull your attention outward. You become hyper-aware of others, how your actions are interpreted, what reactions they might spark, what is silently expected of you. That awareness may be useful in collaboration, but it is poison for certain kinds of thought. The kinds of thought that must be unruly, unmeasured, and untouched by outside influence in order to live. Solitude removes the need for approval. Suddenly you are no longer creating to be seen a certain way, to fit an image, or to satisfy someone else's lens. You create because something inside you insists on being born. Seneca captured this when he said, "We must take a break from the world and withdraw into ourselves." It is not withdrawal out of avoidance. It is withdrawal as preservation, protecting the fragile beginnings of an idea until it grows strong enough to meet the world without breaking. This absence of expectation is what makes solitude so fertile. With no audience waiting for you to perform, you are free to explore the strange, the impractical, even the absurd. And it is often in those neglected directions that originality lives. You can write something that may never be published. Sketch something no one else will ever see. Experiment without fear of failing in public. Solitude becomes a laboratory for imagination. Where mistakes aren't shameful but essential, there is also a rhythm to solitude that nurtures deep creativity. Without the constant interruptions of shared life, you enter what psychologists call flow, that rare state where time dissolves and only the work remains. No need to pause mid-thought to respond to a message. No explanations required for why you're still at your desk at midnight. The momentum builds, carrying you deeper and deeper until something unexpected, something you could never have forced, begins to emerge. Marcus Aurelius understood his sanctuary of the mind when he wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. In that uninterrupted space, your best work finds you." And the creative gift of solitude is not about producing more, but about producing work that feels true. In the absence of others, you stop mimicking. You stop unconsciously molding your ideas to what is popular or what will be praised. You stop editing before you've even begun. What comes out is raw, imperfect, yet entirely yours. That authenticity is worth more than any polish, because it is the foundation of a voice that cannot be replicated. This is why so many thinkers, artists, and writers throughout history have sought solitude, not to reject humanity, but to nurture the one thing humanity needs most: originality. They understood that while collaboration builds, solitude transforms. The deepest, most world-shaping insights are often born in the hours no one else sees. Alone, you wrestle with contradictions. You confront your own limits. You listen for truths, too subtle to be heard in a crowd. At first, those truths unsettle you, but they are the ones that break old patterns and reshape everything you create afterward. In the end, the creative power of solitude comes down to this. It gives you the space to hear yourself without interruption, to build something before the world tells you what it should be. Once you have tasted that kind of freedom, you begin to guard it fiercely, not because you want to shut the world out, but because you know how much more alive your work, your ideas, and your soul become when they are allowed to be born in silence. And creativity isn't the only thing that shifts. When you step out of the constant exchange of emotions that comes with being tethered to another person, something even more subtle begins to happen. At first, it feels disorienting. You're so used to checking the emotional temperature of others before you've even noticed your own, conditioned to adjust your tone, your energy, your words just to maintain balance. But when you step away from that cycle, the static clears. You begin to realize just how much of what you've been carrying never belonged to you. The irritation you thought was yours is residue from constantly absorbing someone else's frustrations. The heaviness in your chest is not permanent. It is the echo of emotional labor that was never yours to hold. The Stoics taught that peace of mind depends not on events themselves, but on the judgments we attach to them. In solitude, those judgments finally become yours, unfiltered, undiluted. no longer shaped by someone else's perspective. At first, this clarity can feel painfully sharp. You're unaccustomed to sitting with emotions without explaining or justifying them. There's no one to reassure you that you're overthinking, no one to distract you with their own storm. You are left with the rawness of feeling itself. In that full, unmediated experience of yourself, you begin to hear a voice you had almost forgotten, your own. You notice what truly excites you, not the things you pretended to be interested in just to mirror someone else's mood. You notice what genuinely irritates you, not the convenient arguments you used to have as a stand-in for deeper truths. Slowly, your emotional landscape stops being a shared battleground and becomes your own sacred territory. This is where the detox truly begins. Without the constant influx of another person's moods, unspoken expectations, and subtle emotional demands, your nervous system finally begins to settle. You no longer wake braced for hidden storms. You stop rehearsing conversations before they happen. You start moving through the day without the invisible negotiation that has been draining you for years. Should I say this? Will this upset them? Do I need to fix this before it explodes? The silence left behind isn't emptiness. It's breathable. It's alive with your rhythm, your pace, your balance. Emotional independence doesn't mean you stop caring for others. It means you stop carrying them in ways that cost you yourself. In solitude, you learn to communicate with yourself first. You validate your emotions without waiting for permission. You give yourself the dignity of feeling fully without trimming the edges for someone else's comfort. And when you return to connection with others, you do so with groundedness, not entanglement. One of the most surprising transformations is the way joy itself changes. When you're tied to another person's emotional weather, your joy is never truly yours, always amplified by their happiness, always diminished by their pain. But alone, joy becomes steady, self-generated, resilient. You begin noticing the small, luminous pleasures that once passed unnoticed. The way morning light paints your kitchen, the sound of your own laughter when no one else is around, the ease of breathing in your own space. Of course, detox is not always comfortable. There will be moments when the absence of another's presence feels sharp, even empty. You might crave the old entanglement simply because it's familiar. But if you resist filling the silence too quickly, you realize that the emptiness was never emptiness at all. It was unclaimed space, waiting for your voice, your desires, your truth. In the end, solitude's detox is not about removing others, but about removing the haze their emotions cast over your inner world. It's about standing in the center of your own storm, learning that you can feel everything fully without drowning. Once you taste that clarity, protecting it becomes non-negotiable. Because in that clarity, you don't just hear yourself again. You recognize yourself. And recognition is the seed of all true transformation. Yet the moment you choose this freedom, the labels arrive: lonely, selfish, incomplete. These words aren't really about you. They are about the discomfort. Your independence stirs in others. You have stepped outside the script, and the world doesn't quite know how to categorize you. The system loves dependence because dependence is stable. A dependent person is predictable, easier to manage, easier to market to, easier to keep in place. If your sense of worth comes from a partner's approval or your role in a group, you will do almost anything to protect it, even betray your own truth. Dependence keeps the system safe. Independence threatens it. That's why independence is mislabeled. They call it loneliness because they cannot imagine fulfillment without constant company. They call it selfishness because you prioritize your path over the comfort of conformity. They call it incomplete because their definition of complete is built around another's presence. These labels function as social control. If independence is framed as failure, fewer people will pursue it. If singlehood is branded as lack, more people will rush to couple up, even if it means silencing themselves to fit the mold. The system doesn't need chains. It only needs to shape your beliefs about meaning. That's why the choice to live free is so radical. It is not only a personal rebellion, it is a refusal to fuel a cycle where authenticity is sacrificed for acceptance. Independence is threatening because it proves you don't need constant validation. You don't need someone else to tell you who you are. You don't need the group to make your choices feel legitimate. And you don't need a partner to keep emptiness at bay. This is not a rejection of love, it's the removal of need. Love that comes from freedom, not fear, is the purest love of all. But freedom is not light. It comes with weight. There will be days when full responsibility feels heavier than expected. No one else is there to absorb the blame when you fall. And no one else gets the credit when you succeed. You carry it all, yet this is the essence of freedom, ownership. Without ownership, freedom is just another disguise for dependence. The truth is, people often fear what they secretly long for. Those who criticize your independence often wish they had the courage to claim their own. Your example forces them to confront their compromises. It is easier to dismiss you than to face the lives they've settled for. So understand this. When they call you lonely, remember that solitude is a source of power. When they call you selfish, remember that self-respect is the foundation of every meaningful connection. When they call you incomplete, remember that wholeness comes not from what you add, but from what you refuse to give away. The system may thrive on dependence, but your life doesn't have to. The mislabeling, lonely, selfish, incomplete fades in importance once you see it for what it really is, not a reflection of you, but of others' discomfort. Their words are just signs that you've stepped outside the boundaries where they feel safest. And once you've stepped beyond those walls, you realize there is far more space out here than you were ever told. It is open, raw, and terrifying. To some, but to you it becomes possibility. Sovereignty is not something you stumble into by accident. It is earned, and the price is never cheap. To claim it, you must release what most people cling to as proof of a good life. Shared plans that give the illusion of direction. Automatic affection that reassures you without requiring effort. Built-in companionship that fills weekends and holidays so you don't feel the sting of silence. These things are warm, familiar, comforting, but they come with strings. Strings that can quietly pull you away from yourself. To step into sovereignty means cutting some of those strings. And that is why so few choose it, because it demands giving up comforts that feel too good to lose. In solitude, no one validates or vetoes your decisions. Every choice is yours alone. That freedom can feel intoxicating one moment and terrifying the next. There's no one to split the blame with when things fall apart, but there's also no one to hold you back when your vision is clear and your instincts are sharp. Sovereignty means owning both outcomes, the victories and the mistakes, with the same calm acceptance. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Solitude becomes the training ground for that mastery. The cost of sovereignty is not only paid in comforts. You also pay in moments of doubt, in nights when the silence presses heavier than you thought possible, in mornings when you wish someone were there to share small joys, a glance, a laugh, a sip of coffee. Sovereignty can feel lonely, not because you lack people, but because you've chosen not to lean on them as your anchor. You learn to be your own reassurance. You learn to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it with company. And that skill, the ability to hold your ground in the absence of external support, becomes one of your greatest strengths. The beauty of sovereignty is that it changes the quality of every connection you do choose to have. Without dependence, relationships stop being lifelines and start being luxuries. You don't seek someone to complete you or rescue you. You invite them to walk beside you because you want to, not because you have to. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole within yourself. Sovereignty is that wholeness lived out loud. You can love deeply without fearing that losing someone will strip you of your identity. You carry your fullness with you into every bond. But understand this, the world does not encourage sovereignty. It thrives on mutual reliance, on the predictability of people bound to each other in ways that keep them manageable. A sovereign person is harder to persuade, harder to exploit, harder to keep in place. You become less willing to tolerate what doesn't serve your growth. That will unsettle some, and you may watch certain relationships fade, not because you turned colder, but because they were built on your willingness to compromise yourself. The price also includes confronting yourself without distraction. There is no one left to blame when you avoid your purpose. No one to hide behind when you procrastinate. You see yourself clearly, your blind spots, your excuses, your wasted time. And in that clarity, you face a choice, either change or accept who you are without running from it. Both are difficult, but either path leads to freedom, because both force you into truth. The reward is nothing less than a life unmistakably your own. Every decision, every achievement, every mistake carries your signature. You move without dilution, without bending to fit someone else's mold. Your time is yours, your energy is yours, your mind is yours. That doesn't make life easier, but it makes life yours. And once you have lived like that, once you've woken each day knowing you are the sole author of your story, it becomes nearly impossible to give it back. The comfort of shared plans, of automatic affection, will always tug at you. But they will never outweigh the quiet, steady power of belonging completely to yourself. That is the true price of sovereignty. And it is also the reason it is worth every cost. There comes a point in solitude where something shifts. At first, being alone feels like an absence you are desperate to fill, a room too quiet, a life missing a sound you've grown used to. You catch yourself glancing at your phone, not to say something, but to hope someone will remind you that you matter. In the beginning, solitude tests you. It presses against every fear you have about yourself. But if you endure, it transforms. What once felt like emptiness becomes the soil of your becoming. Solitude has a way of showing you every crack, every hidden dependence, every place you leaned on someone else to keep yourself intact. In the beginning, this feels unbearable. But if you resist the urge to run back into the warm familiarity of validation, if you stay with the silence long enough, something remarkable begins to happen. The quiet no longer feels like punishment. It begins to feel like a kind of strength you didn't know was in you. The transformation is not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or lightning. It's gradual, so subtle you almost miss it. You wake up one morning and realize you no longer feel that compulsion to check in with someone before making a choice. You no longer crave external reassurance every time doubt creeps in. Instead, you've learned the rare art of steadying yourself. That is the quiet, unshakable power of independence. It doesn't scream for attention, but it cannot be broken in that moment. You stop outsourcing your stability. And in doing so, you take back a freedom most people spend their whole lives chasing, but never claim. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus taught that true freedom is born not from controlling others, but from controlling your own mind and desires. Peace is not what the world grants you. It is what you train yourself to cultivate regardless of circumstance. There's also a profound calm in knowing you can carry yourself through life without leaning on someone else's emotional scaffolding. You've faced nights of doubt, mornings of loneliness, moments when you wondered if you were strong enough to stand alone, and you emerged, not untouched but unbroken. You no longer fear the quiet because you have learned to hear your own voice in it. And over time, that voice has grown louder, clearer, more trustworthy than the noise of outside opinions. This shift reshapes your relationships too. It doesn't push people away, it refines why they are there. When you no longer seek someone to complete you, you choose people who expand you. Love, friendship, and connection stop being about filling an emptiness and start being about sharing abundance. Jung understood this deeply. Real connection only blossoms between two whole individuals, each responsible for their own growth. Once you have met yourself fully, you can finally meet others without the weight of hidden need. This unshakable self isn't immune to pain or loss. You will still feel disappointment, longing, even grief, but they no longer destabilize you. Loss does not erase you because you no longer confuse someone else's presence with your own foundation. You sat in silence, discovered that it was not empty but alive, and built your home there. Once you carry that knowledge, life itself feels lighter. There is humility here, too. Self-reliance does not mean isolation. It means you can accept help without collapsing into dependence. You can love without fear of losing yourself. You can let people come and go without it, destroying your center, because your center is no longer built on them. That is the paradox of freedom. The more you belong to yourself, the more freely you can give yourself to others. Even your sense of time changes. You no longer rush to escape your thoughts or cram your calendar just to avoid silence. You begin to savor the ordinary, a quiet meal, the way dusk colors the sky, an evening lost in a book. These are no longer placeholders. Before real life, they are life. They are enough. And in that realization comes the deepest truth. You were never incomplete. You were simply obscured by noise, by distraction, by dependence. Once stripped away, what remains is not fragile, but steady, whole, and vibrantly alive. That is, when you become unshakable. From here, there is no going back. You can never again live a life where your peace depends on someone else holding you together, because now you know the strongest ground you will ever stand on is yourself. In the end, the greatest freedom is realizing you are already whole. Protect that truth, live by it, and never let the world convince you otherwise. If this message spoke to you, let it be a reminder that your journey doesn't end here. On your screen, there is another video waiting, one that will take you even deeper into strength, clarity, and the art of becoming unshakable. Watch it next. And thank you for walking this path with Stoic Journal, where every choice you make, every step you take, brings you closer to becoming who you were meant to be. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment below. Do you think solitude is power, or do you believe true strength is found in partnership? And if you're ready to go deeper into this journey of resilience and self-discovery, head over to the full StoicCraft playlist. Your next step toward becoming unshakable is waiting there.